A warm welcome, everyone, to this first negotiation briefing from COP25 and the Nordic Pavilion here in Madrid. A warm welcome also to our audience in Stockholm, which is the Nordic country's back door to these climate negotiations, which actually means that people in the Nordic countries doesn't really have to fly into Madrid. They could take the train to Stockholm. That is our Nordic solution to this. And welcome also to our viewers on YouTube and Facebook, where we are broadcasting live as we speak. With me here on stage in Madrid tonight, I have the head of the Danish delegation to the UNFCCC, Annette Eiersted. A warm welcome to you, and we are very excited to have you here.
Thank you very much.
My name is André Jamholt, and I will be the moderator for this event. And with us from Stockholm, we also have Margit Strin, who will keep a keen eye on the audience in Stockholm. Isn't that right, Mary?
That is right. I am looking at them right now. There are people coming in all the time.
So if you guys in Stockholm have any questions, please raise your hand and Mary will let me know as we go along. For our viewers on social media, please write your questions in the comment field underneath this broadcast and my colleagues back door or behind the scene will let me know, and I will forward the questions to Annette here. So enough of all the practicalities. Let's get down to business, Annette. There are some 25,000 people expected to visit COP during the next 2 weeks, but there is only a handful of people who are actually negotiating. You are one of those, and you have quite experience in this area. So first, could you please tell or explain to us what exactly is this UNFCCC?
Yeah, I'll try to explain it. Just to say there's more than just a handful of negotiators here. I would say that. But just to say, this is the Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC, which is the Convention of Climate Change. But what's actually taking place is that we have the Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC, of the Paris Agreement, of the Kyoto Protocol. So for that, there's a lot of negotiations going around these days. So this is the decision-making place for the parties to the convention.
I think my next question is equally easy, I hope. Because what really intrigues me is how you're going about the negotiations. How do you play this game?
Yeah, it is a game. No, the negotiations is divided in a lot of different tracks. Some of them are very, very technical and into very small details where you really need to have been into this for years to understand what's actually going on. So we have a number of rooms here where negotiation is taking place. I think there's 25 of them around here where we have different tracks in the negotiations that are going on. For this first week, it's mostly technical and it's negotiators on my level and on technical level. And then for next week, we have the high level segment where we will have the politicians coming in. So we will have the ministerial segment and therefore we will have some more political negotiations taking place there. So what we cannot solve on technical level, we will have to take to the next week, and then we'll have to involve our ministers.
Yesterday, we heard a lot about what the young people is expecting from this COP. What are your expectations for the 2019 negotiations?
I think I have different kind of expectations for the negotiation. Well, I hope we really will get a lot of work done on the technical issues, but I also have some expectations for everything that's going around outside of the negotiations. As you can see, those of you who are here in Madrid, we have a lot of pavilions, we have a lot of action going on where the different stakeholders are actually talking to each other. How can we do something more to address the climate change? What can we do to accelerate the climate action? And how can we, when the politicians are coming here, send a strong message to us to say, well, we need to do more. I think that's also kind of what the youth are asking us to do. We need to do more. We need to do something to stop the climate change and the effects that we see in the environment at this point. So I have some expectations for the negotiations as such, because if we don't have the rules in place, we cannot follow what we are doing. We cannot look into what others are doing. So that needs to be in place. And then we have to do the real action where we have to involve much more stakeholders than just the governments.
Because, as you said, action is kind of the buzzword for this COP. How much action is it around the negotiation table? Are you focused on action at all?
Yes, we are focusing on action. We're also focusing on rules, and that might be a bit boring if you're not into it, but we need to have the rules in place, as I said just before. But we also, at least from our point, from Danish side, focusing on having rules that will help us enhance our ambitions over time, because that's needed. So for that, we do have action in there, and we have it in our minds, but it's not that much action in the rooms as such, if that's what you're asking.
One of the special things for the Nordic delegations is that you have youth delegates.
Yeah.
Yesterday, the Norwegian youth delegate, Sofie Nordvik, told us that she has high expectations for the negotiators as well as the politicians. And she, kind of behalf of the young people, demanded that you listen to the young people and brought their ideas and solutions to the table. Are you listening to the youth delegates in that matter?
Yes, we are listening to the youth delegates. We have 2 in our delegation. They're not here yet, but they will come, and we're actually meeting with them every morning to hear what have they heard, what are they looking into. But I also think that the ministers are listening to the youth and to see what's important and what do we need to do more. And they have inspired this to say, well, we in Denmark, but also for the Nordic countries, have quite ambitious governments at this point. And that's also because they have listened to what has been said on the streets, on the strikes and stuff like that. So yes, they are listening.
Could you give us an example of an idea or a youth solution, if you like, that you have gotten from the young people and who has ended up on the negotiation table?
Maybe not directly to the negotiation table, but at least I know that the youth delegates that we brought last year to Katowice had this idea to have this youth count. I cannot say specifically that we have brought this to the negotiation table, but we have this intention to do, for instance, when we are discussing what we call Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is this market mechanisms. For us, it's very important that we listen to others to say, well, this should be something that helps us deliver on ambition over time. And that's kind of also listening to say, well, that's what they want, so that's what we have to do.
I think it's time actually to let our audience kind of take over my job and ask some questions. Mary, are there any questions from the audience in Stockholm?
Are there any questions from the audience in Stockholm? Yes, we have a question.
Yeah, Uno Svedin, Stockholm Resilience Center. I'm interested in the perspective of the time over the exponential that needs to be handled. And then we all know that the first part is more important than the others, because we need to save sort of strong efforts in the beginning of the curve in order to have the curve starting. So what are the thinking about these curves, especially the first part, let's say the first 8 years, 10 years?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Anette.
I think the science tells us that we are in a hurry. We need to do something more, and we need to do it fast. And that's at least what we are listening to. So that's something that you point into, that we next year will have to see revised national determined contribution that would say what does each and every party commit itself to do up until 2030. And that's one of the major issues that should come out of this. We need to put a pressure on the major emitters, but basically to all to say, well, you need to enhance your ambitions. You need to come with more ambitious goals next year. And that's one of the things that we will try to convey this message. And I'm sure my ministers will come and say the same next week.
May I have a question myself, if that is okay?
Go ahead, Mary. Go ahead.
Because when I hear you say this, you say we. This is what we want. Who is we here?
Right now, we is Denmark. It's
Okay.
also the Nordic countries. When I talk about we, Denmark is negotiating through the EU. So we will have to first influence the EU to do something more, and then the EU will also go out and say something to say, well, we need the major emitters to do more. I'm talking from a Danish perspective. I think I'm kind of talking about from a Nordic perspective as well. Now I have to be careful, but we have kind of the same ambitions. So I'm speaking from a Danish perspective when I say we.
I think it might be okay for our international audience here in Madrid to emphasize the fact that even though the Nordic countries are seen as one, there are 5 different countries and they are negotiating separately. But then again, back to you, how much do you talk to your partners from the other Nordic countries? How much do you cooperate in the negotiations?
Of course, well, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark are part of the European Union. Sorry, so we see each other every day and we speak together. As for Norway and Iceland, we also communicate with them. We have a Nordic meeting going on just now in the Danish pavilion, actually, to say what do we want to do more, how can we use each other, where have we similarities, and where can we find common grounds and stuff like that. We will also have our Nordic ministers to meet next week. They have an informal meeting as well. So for that, we do coordinate, and when we see each other around the halls, we know each other. So for that reason, we are actually also coordinating.
I think it's time to see if there are any questions here in Madrid to the head of the Danish delegation. Are there any questions? Don't be shy. No?
But we have
Mary.
one more. Yes, I do
Yes.
have a question here.
Thank you. I'm Jonas. I'm from Denmark, and I want to ask you specifically, how can you negotiate on behalf of Denmark when our current government is still financing or still negotiating their climate ambitions for the next 4 years? We haven't heard anything about the climate law, except promises for the campaign in the spring. So you say you negotiate for Denmark, and I ask you, on what foundation do you negotiate for Denmark?
I negotiate on a political mandate on different issues. I know that there's negotiations going on in Denmark right now to establish the climate law, but we do have set this national target of 70% reduction in 2030. We have a government that said we have to do more, we need to be ambitious. So for that reason and for that background, I can negotiate from that political mandate.
Yes. Any more questions from Stockholm, Mary?
From me, one more question, if that's okay. I'd like to know when you say that you are ambitious, and you also say that the other Nordic countries are ambitious. Would you say that if you compare the Nordics to the rest of the world, where do you find those that are aiming for approximately at least the same things that you do?
Oh, that's a bit difficult to say. Well, we do have other EU countries who are ambitious as well. We do have some of the Latin American countries who have set net zero targets as well in 2050. I think we have a lot of the developing countries and the small island states, which are very ambitious on this as well. They don't have the same kind of emissions that we have, so they don't have the same kind of reduction targets. But still, we need to make sure that in order for them to develop, we need to make sure that they do it in the right way. And I think there's a lot of attention to that in the developing countries as well.
I think we have a question from the audience here. Yes. Please wait for the mic and then present yourself.
Yes, hello. My name is Asker, and I'm a student at Tufts University. I am wondering, now that the US is taking less of an active stance here in the climate negotiations internationally, how do you manage to persuade and put pressure on China and India to cut their emissions now that the leverage from the US is weakened, sort of?
It is a challenge, to be honest, yes, because now we don't have the US taking the lead. But we do have the EU as a major player, and we're really trying to influence the EU position so that we have EU as a global leader, and then for EU to cooperate, especially with China, because they're quite an important player on this one. If we don't have China, well, it's going to be difficult. From a Danish perspective, we also have bilateral cooperation with both China and India on renewable energy and stuff like that, to actually try to have some of our experience out in their countries as well, and help them with the green transition. But EU should be, we're trying to have EU to take the place of the US, if you could say it like that, as a global leader together with the others.
Thank you.
Any more? There's a question behind there, back there.
Hello, I'm Alalbjörk. I'm the Icelandic youth delegate. I wanted to ask, yesterday at the opening ceremony of COP, it was said that right now we need to reduce global emissions by 7.6% every year until 2030 to be able to stay below the 1.5 degree target. Do you believe that Denmark will reduce their carbon emissions by 7.6% next year or the year after that? Is that something that you see happening with the current actions?
Well, as was said just before, we're negotiating a new climate law in Denmark. Basically these days, we have set a national target of 70% reduction of greenhouse gases in 2030. So that put us in the curve to do it. Whether or not it will be within the first year, I don't know, because that will depend on one thing, the climate law, but also the climate action plan, which comes afterwards to say, now we have the law, now we have the goal, how are we going to implement it? And that's for negotiation soon, but at least we have the long-term goal, and we are committed to fulfill this goal, even though it's going to be difficult.
We have one more question back here in Madrid.
Yeah, I'm a little, I'm a bit of insider because I work here in the Nordic pavilion as Andreas' colleague. But I was wondering, when you say about the Nordic countries, and we know that the Nordic countries and Denmark are very ambitious when it comes to fighting the climate change and in the negotiations. But there are also, of course, countries that are not so ambitious. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any negotiations because everybody would be on the same side. But what are the grounds for the hesitation among those countries who are a little bit not so ambitious? How do they describe the hesitation, and what are the reasons to that they're not as ambitious as we are?
Well, it's a bit difficult for me to say why they are hesitating to do that. I think this is a long road that you have to take, and you have to commit to do this, even though you don't have all the solutions in place. I think some are waiting to see, do we actually have the solutions on this one? Can wind, water, solar power actually do it? Can we actually, do we need the fossil fuels still? We do for some time, probably, but how can we actually take it out and still secure that we will have a sound development and an economic growth? I think there's some doubts around that one. How can we do it best? There could also be some financial issues into this, that this is costly. It's costed Denmark, it cost the Nordic countries a lot of money to be where we are today. How can we actually facilitate to do this in other countries as well? So there could be more reasons for that, and there could also be some national circumstances that say, well, we are an oil-producing country, so we actually want to keep it like that.
Thank you.
And we are close to the end of this short briefing. But before we say goodbye, Annette, I would like to ask you if you are optimistic about the outcome of these negotiations.
I have to be. I am, at this point I am. I do know that we're going to have some very difficult discussions, especially two subjects that we know are going to hit the ministers next week, and it's going to be difficult. But we have to try, and we have to believe that we can succeed in this one. And we also have to believe that we can send the message that we need more action now.
I have so much wanted to ask you about what those two issues are, but we are running out of time, and we do come back with briefings from the negotiations tomorrow as well at the same time. So I think it's going on for 2 weeks, so we will get time to get back to those issues. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Stockholm, for listening in, and thank you to all our viewers on YouTube and Facebook. See you in about 10 minutes when we will be back for a new event. Thank you.
Dear friends, welcome to Norrsken House and to this evening discussion that we will have here during our Nordic Climate Action Weeks. And welcome also to you that follow us from Madrid or from wherever in the world you might be. I will now give the floor to the moderator of this evening's talk, Kristina Persson, founder of Global Utmaning and former Minister of Strategic Development and also of Nordic Cooperation.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I'm very happy to be here and to be moderator. Global Utmaning, Global Challenges, has tried for all its life, for 15 years, to put climate warming and climate policy, climate action on the top of the government's agenda. But I'm sorry to say, we have not succeeded so well. 1992, the UN had a meeting where all the UN members, or more or less all the UN members, signed a convention to stop climate warming. That was 30 years ago. It's almost 30 years ago. And then everything went on as usual. Business as usual. Nothing happened, really. Nothing happened. Not on a global scale. Sweden has done some, but I'm sorry to say that the emissions have ceased to diminish. Over the last 3 years, it has been more or less zero change. And at the same time, we have tried all the time, not only Global Utmaning, but this year we decided that we couldn't wait any longer for the government, the Swedish government, to take action. So we decided to do it ourselves, to produce a strategic plan and an action plan for change, and to do everything in our power to convince the decision makers and, of course, the citizens to support the plan and to implement the plan. So this is the work that we have decided. And tonight at this seminar, we have called together some of the key persons in this work that is starting now. And I will present them to you very soon. I just would like to say that we live in a state of emergency. The UN, the EU Parliament is so right. Only some 10 years remain until it will be too late to stop temperature from rising to more than 2 degrees. And we don't know the effect of this change. We know that the consequences for the world economy will be very serious. And we know that Sweden, cold countries in the north, like Sweden, will also be hard affected, seriously affected. we are very dependent on trade, very dependent on exports and imports. And it's hard to say exactly what will happen. We just know that stability, welfare and stability, and eventually our civilization and democracy will be at risk. And of course, this must not happen. We must do literally everything that is in our power to stop this from happening. And that's why we meet in Madrid, and that's why we meet here tonight, and that's why we are starting our action plan. We call it the super climate plan. In relation to other plans, it will be super. We are in the beginning of this work, and we will be happy to come back to you, wherever you are, Madrid or Stockholm, and tell you more about what we are going to do. So we will start to have a presentation of the state of the climate in the world. And we have two speakers. We have Ingmar Rentzhog, who is the chair of Global Utmaning, and also the founder of We Don't Have Time, a social climate network. And then after Ingmar will Staffan Lestadius, who is professor at KTH, the Royal Swedish Institute of Technology University, and also the chair of the Swedish Global Utmaning Council for Climate and Resources. So let's start to get a briefing on the state of affairs of the climate and climate policy. Please, Ingmar, you go ahead. I'm sorry, yes, I completely forget. We are supposed to have a youth perspective on the discussions in Madrid. And to that event, we have therefore a Swedish representative from the youth, from the LSU. That is Ludwig Bengtsson, who is with us today. Hello, Ludwig, I see you. Do you see me? Yes, hi. And Ludwig, we will be happy to get your comments on what is happening right now in Madrid and what you expect to happen. Will there be a youth perspective? Because if there is a youth perspective in Madrid, it means radical and ambitious action that will be decided upon and then taken by the participants in Madrid. Do you expect that to happen? Please, Ludwig, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. Happy that you remembered youth. Often we are forgotten. When I got this brief, I was asked, how could we better include youth in climate politics and in climate negotiations? So I asked the youth who are here for consultations and prepared a brief statement. The science is clear that if we don't make immediate cuts to emissions, our lives and environmental integrity of the planet is at stake. We risk our homes to extreme weather and sea level rise. We risk our food production to droughts and species extinction. We risk our health to air pollution and heat waves. And we, the youth, we know this. We can't escape the fact that our futures are being written in rooms such as this. It stands abundantly clear that despite valiant efforts from many states, emissions are still rising. And this is completely unacceptable. It is a crisis, it is an emergency, and it is a catastrophe. And knowing what we know, youth can provide valuable insights on how to turn the tide. During the Secretary General's Climate Action Summit this past September, several countries, including Sweden and Norway, signed the Kwangesh Climate Pledge. In it, it states that the signatories have committed to taking youth perspectives into consideration when implementing the Paris Agreement. And so this includes when drafting nationally determined contributions, long-term greenhouse gas emission strategies, and adaptation strategies. So they have signed up to take our perspective on these things. And the key thing here is to include us at an early stage, not when the plans are already set for consultations. Let us instead tell you what science says we need to do for us to have a livable future. Let us tell you the adverse effects of an unjust policy. And let us then work together from that point to ensure that we create a future that inspires us with hope instead of dread. And when it comes to ambition, The NDCs are set to be updated during the next year. And this really is the best opportunity we have on an international arena to set us on the path to 1.5 degrees. And here we as young people really can use this opportunity to leverage the power we have gotten over the last years to push our governments and, in the case of Sweden, the EU, to enhance their NDCs, set ambitious short-term goals as well as long-term goals. And the NDCs are not an agenda item per se, as we heard from the Danish delegation previously, but the climate doesn't care if it's on the agenda or not. It puts itself on the agenda, and that's where we really need to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludwig. And now I give the floor to Ingmar Rensog. Please, Ingmar.
Thank you.
Can I turn this off?
Hello, everyone. I used to work in the finance industry, but there was a man that changed my mind, and this is the man. When Donald Trump got elected in the US election, it got me realized that our world leaders, they're not acting on the climate crisis. And it doesn't matter if it's US president or the Swedish prime minister, it's the same in the whole world. Our leaders doesn't act on this crisis. So I sold my old company, and today I work full-time with the climate crisis and solutions. And exactly 1 year ago, I was standing on this stage together with my colleagues from Global Utmaning and We Don't Have Time, where we launched the climate emergency plan from the Club of Rome. And it looks like this.
I want you to listen very carefully.
We used to talk about climate change as something in the future, but it's with us now.
We must move fast. This is 0 hour to act on climate change.
Human beings and the natural world are on a collision course.
The world is on track to be unlivable.
The anxiety was eating me.
The largest segment is either not very or fairly just a little bit concerned.
This is not a drill.
I used to have to go out and search the past few years to find all the slides I'd need for a presentation.
I can tell you that Californians are feeling the pain right now.
And now, all within 2018 and find.
We have been seeing in the last decades droughts, the summer seasons becoming hotter and longer and drier.
When forests get dry, they burn. California earlier this year, Greece, Japan not known for its wildfires, Siberia, the United Kingdom, again in California, still burning.
It's crucial that we who understands the urgency start to act.
I say get angry, get very angry.
There's an insane focus on just more and more and more, and that is killing us. Humanity is always much too slow in reacting.
Do something about it. Take action.
Because if we run, others will follow.
Perhaps you've heard of the old acronym NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y, not in my backyard. A new one that I was made aware of a couple of weeks ago, NIMTO, not in my term of office.
Today, our world leaders they are talking about the climate crisis, but they still don't act on it. And that's why we need a climate plan. That's why we need action, and we need it now. And the reason for that, I would like to just explain the background why this is so important. What you see here is the thin layer that's called the atmosphere. All life on Earth depends on this really, really thin layer that is healthy. But we don't treat this so good. Instead, we just use it as an open sewer, and we put out a lot of greenhouse gases out there. The most common one is carbon dioxide. And as you can see here, it's growing, growing, growing for every year, and it doesn't stop. And the problem with this is that what we put up there also stay up there for a very long time. And when people talk about the problem, people often forget to mention that it is not enough to stop the emissions. We also need to put back what we already had put up there. And you can see this very clearly in this picture. If you take a long time period of 800,000 years, we have never seen as high level of carbon dioxide as we see today. This is absurd, and we're only seeing the beginning of the effects of the levels in the atmosphere we have today. So if we stop everything, we still have a big problem to solve. This changes the mindset we need to solve this crisis. We can't just solve the crisis by stop doing things. We need to start doing the right things. That's very important. It's not enough to stop doing things. We need to start the action of doing the right things. And the problem with high level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is, as you know, that it will turn very hot here on Earth. And the 5th warmest years ever measured by humans on this Earth has also been the 5th latest years. But the problem with this 2 degrees target and the talk about it is that people still don't get how severe this problem is. And I think that is because we don't communicate this in the right way. If it is 2 degrees hotter outside here today in Stockholm in December, I think that all of us here will think that that would be nice, not something bad. But if you instead think of your body temperature, the fact is that we today, all humans on Earth, have fewer. We have 38 degrees in our body, and we're not feeling so well. We're 1 degree above the mean temperature, the normal Earth temperature. So when you hear someone talking about 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, etc., translate that to your body temperature. And as we know, we're heading for at least 3 degrees. That's 40 degrees fewer. That's bad news. And when you get fever, you also feel sick and feel symptoms. And one of those symptoms is that it's getting very hot outside. Last summer in 2018, we had 80 forest fires here in Sweden, a northern country. That's very unusual. And this is a picture of one of the first one. I was driving in the car right behind that bus. And last summer was very, very hot. In Sweden, we had the hottest May, June, July, and August. We practically had no rain for a whole summer. But this year, people have forgotten this. Because this year, it was a normal, rainy, cold summer here in northern Sweden. But in the rest of Europe, they had a really, really hot temperature. And it was not just Europe. Paris, 46 degrees. India, 50 degrees. Kuwait, 52 degrees. Saudi Arabia, 55 degrees. And I could go on. So many, many heat records was broken this year. But now you may think that, can't you find the heat records somewhere in the world? Is that the proof of climate changing? If the climate are supposed to be stable, and it is, it should be about the same cold records compared to heat records. And if you look into the statistic last year, we had 40 cold records in the world, compared to 430 heat records. It's very hard to be a climate denier those days. The problem with the heating is also that the heat is not just heating the land, it's also heating the ocean. 93% of the energy is stored in the ocean. And when the ocean heats, you will see those things. The energy needs to get away somewhere. So we will see a lot of more extreme weathers. And if you look into the reinsurance industry, in 40 years, extreme weather has increased 300%. And this is just looking back, not looking forward. And it's not just extreme weather that is threatening us. I think you all have also heard about tipping points. And this is just one example of a tipping point. This is frozen methane gases in the Arctic, in the Siberia tundra. And what you see here is that it's melting. And the problem with that is that methane gases is much more potent greenhouse gases. And what could happen is that we could trigger a chain reaction where this melts, it got hotter, and it melts even more, and we humans can't do anything about it. And just to demonstrate what that guy in Russia are standing on is this. This is what happens when it explodes, because methane is very explosive. And it's not just methane gases, it's also human chain reaction that are and could be an even bigger problem. I'm talking about climate refugees. There are studies out there talking about that the world could see 1 billion climate migrants in 30 years. 30 years. So even if you live in a country, maybe Sweden, we don't know, where you still could grow food, it wouldn't be so pleasant because everyone would like to move there, and it will be really crowded. So this is a big problem today and even bigger in the future. But the thing is, we have the solutions. We can solve this. It doesn't need to happen in this way. And that's why we are here. We don't have time, but we still have time to act. And I would like to just exemplify this with another big environmental catastrophe that the world actually has solved. I'm talking about the ozone layer that freons threatened. And 40 years ago, the world leaders came together and forbid these gases to be used. I don't think you miss freons today. We live perfect lives without freons in our daily life. But if they didn't have solved this 40 years ago, we here today couldn't go outside without covering our skin. So this was a huge problem that the world actually solved. And the good news is that we have a start of the climate crisis. All countries on Earth has agreed that we have a problem and that we need to stay under 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. But we're still not acting on it. And what this seminar is all about is that we don't need to wait for political system. We can make the change ourselves. And I firmly believe that the solution are in the businesses. And this is just one example of 190 companies, global companies, that has pledged to only use 100% renewable energy. So if our world leaders doesn't act, we need to act. And that's my message.
Thank you, Ingmar. And now Staffan will give us his picture, which has the same basic message, but maybe in a little bit more scientific language.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Anyhow, let's start from the beginning. This has been a dark year, and my knowledge sources here, which I based my presentation on, are all these international reports. I think there are about 10 or something, and they all show the same picture. So these are the basics for my presentation today. Let's start with the temperature increase, as you probably know, and this is the background for the Madrid meeting. This was shown last year from the IPCC report. What you see here is, on the one hand, global temperature is increasing, but you also see that the rate of increase is increasing. And you also see there is no signs that it is leveling off. That is the basic reason for the Madrid discussions today. You see over there also what Ingmar talked about. This is the temperature or the fever of the globe. The more red it is, the higher is the fever. And what you see, it's higher up there in the north than the average. Today, or last year, the fever was 1.16 degrees centigrade above what it should be compared to what it was 150 years ago. And this, of course, is related to carbon dioxide emissions. What you see here is the increase of carbon dioxide emissions after the Second World War. We call that the Great Acceleration. And the impact of that is, of course, it is the surface under that which creates the greenhouse effect. And what you see here is basically, with this rate of increase, 50% of all global emissions have occurred after 1990. That is the importance of it. What you see here also is what is happening just now. In fact, last year, I think that is the most alarming thing, is last year you reached all-time high as regards the level of carbon dioxide emissions. It was also more or less the all-time high as regards the rate of increase. It was the second highest rate of increase of carbon dioxide emissions. And that occurs after, should we call it, about 30 years of international negotiations. In fact, I think this Madrid meeting is the 70th. We have had 70 international climate meetings during this, since about 1990. During this period, the carbon dioxide emissions have increased with about 60%, more or less 1% per meeting. And last year, it was probably 2% increase. There is some divergence on International Energy Agency's estimates and British Petroleum, and also what this research institute has got. But roughly 2% increase last year. A lot of data here, but just focus on this one. These are the important things. I've taken them from British Petroleum statistics. What you see here is that the relation between the ratio and the relation between the increase of fossil fuels last year in relation to the increase of renewables. You see that in the United States, the increase of fossil fuels is 7.5 times as large as the increase of renewables. In China, the increase is, which is leading in renewables, the increase in fossil fuels is only 2.6 times as fast as the increase of renewables. On a global level, you see more or less the increase last year of the use of fossil fuels is roughly 4 times as large as the increase of renewables. That is basically the result last year. This is taken from the British Petroleum statistics. You have a question, a very short one, because I have a very short presentation.
The increase, is that capacity or is it actual consumption?
This is the actual consumption. And this has contributed to a situation now when the material metabolism is higher than ever on global level. We have never industrialized and transported and manufactured so much material as we do now. It is doubling every 25 years. And in relation to that, even the fossil use is higher than ever. It's doubling every 25 years. And we are still on that track, and that means that half of all emissions have occurred during the last 25 years. There are some data showing that you have a similar situation in Sweden. There has been some leveling off, but last year, 2018, in fact, our emissions from Sweden increased also. This is the report published just some days ago, some weeks ago, and it shows it is from United Nations Environmental Program, and it is available now in the negotiations in Madrid. What you see here is what you have to do here to reduce the emissions if you want to go to the 1.5 centigrade target. This is 1.8. I think this is more realistic. I don't think we can reach that. And this is the 2 centigrade target. And this is the way we are moving now. And this means, and another picture here, we are now moving towards a global temperature increase somewhere between 4.5 and 3.5 centigrades in the end of this century, if we do nothing. And there are no indications that we are doing anything. At least we can't find it in the statistics. Cristina Figueres, who was the leading figure in the Paris negotiations some years ago, she and some other researchers, including Johan Rockström, published this paper in Nature 2017. It is the same thing. This is the way the carbon dioxide emissions are increasing. These are the strategies we have to go if we want to keep the temperature below 1.5 centigrades. And we are not on that track now. So, in summary, we are heading towards a catastrophe. Not for the planet, but for mankind and human society. I will summarize this to say, this is not primarily a question of energy and energy production. This is a question of our belief that man is mastering nature. It is a question of our belief that we have the idea of progress, that everything is progressing. This is our understanding of growth, our understanding of time, what is the normal time to transport ourselves. It on our views of welfare, which is deeply related in a symbiotic relation to fossil fuels. This is are the basic things. It is not primarily a question of technology fix or a question of just switching something in the energy production. This is a fundamental crisis rather than a pure energy crisis. So that means we have to act against this background. That means we have to make proactive things and reactive to keep what is already too late to change. It is a question of top-down strategies are not enough. After 17 international negotiations or conferences, there is no single, we haven't solved anything. We must also start a bottom-up strategy on an individual, local, and national level. That is what our climate plan is about. There is a need for individual change, not only on social level. And because we are all small, we must rely our strategies on the dynamics of climate activism. We start and others will follow. That is the basic strategy. We have to have a 7% reduction. I thought I was really, how to say, very extreme on that belief just some weeks ago, but now I can recognize that the United Nations Environmental Programme is moving towards 7.5% annual carbon dioxide emission reductions. It's an enormous target, and it is necessary. And we have to calibrate a complex system related to this. And I think this is one of the aims of the plans we are doing now with Global Utmaning is having now, trying to calibrate all these things to obtain a reduction of about 7% a year. And it is important to create this plan, to create a narrative, to convince people that it is possible. Now it seems too overwhelming, it seems too much, we can't do it, and that means we must create a picture, a narrative showing it is possible if you do this, that, and that. I think this is the important target with the work we are planning to do. So we must create narratives with high credibility. We can't end up just with apocalyptic visions. So our work with the climate plan is a means to turn away from the present catastrophe course to a path of hope and of alternatives in a situation when we lack a strong political leadership. Our politicians need help, and so do we. Thank you.
Thank you, Staffan. We have all the insights about the dangers of what is happening right now. And we have all the technology, we have all the money, the economy that is needed. We have the institutions in many countries, especially in countries like Sweden, to go ahead and change and make change. But we are not doing it. This could be the theme for one new seminar. Why are we not doing enough? But we will do our best to make the actors, the Swedish political actors, because the truth is that we need both business and politicians to act, and the support from citizens to make the politicians dare to take action. And now we move over to what should be done. How could it be done? We have the instruments, we have the knowledge. Peder Folke, you work at Material Economics. Material Economics is a consultancy firm that started a few years ago, specializing in material resources, circular economy, and climate mitigation, climate policies. And you have been doing plenty of work in other countries. And I won't go further into all your merits. You are the one of the project managers at Material Economics, Peder. So I give you the floor to tell us a little bit about what will be the content of the super climate plan that Global Utmaning is now launching or starting the work to formulate. Please, Peder, floor is yours.
Hi, I will talk to you about the climate plan, and more specifically, why does it need to be an integrated climate plan? And why do we even need it? So first, if we take one step back. As you all know, I think at least, since the 90s, we've seen a pretty good ride in Sweden. We've seen emission reductions for almost 2 decades, largely thanks to renewable energy, heat, and energy efficiency. But as we've heard earlier today, for the last 2-3 years, the reductions has almost stopped. 53 million tons remains. And how do we cut those down? Well, the first thing to answer that question is, what do they consist of? And it's not that much. It's basically 10 different things that represent 80% of all our emissions. It's within transportation, industry, agriculture, and a few other things. And it's your usual suspects. It's the cars and the trucks, the iron and the steel making, it's the cement and concrete, it's the refineries, it's the chemistry, i.e. plastics, it's the farmland, the animal digestion, it's the district heating and the machines. It sounds a lot when I say it like that, right? But it's only 10 things. And the good thing is that the technical solutions to solving each of these sectors is already here or almost here, with a few exceptions, but most of them. So what does this tell us? It tells us that we're going out of a first phase. In a first phase where we focused on energy and heat, and we focused on what we call transportation part 1, biofuels. What we need to do now is transportation part 2, which is electrification and new mobility and logistics systems, and we need to transform industry. It always seemed impossible, but it's not. You have new industrial processes, and I might jump into a couple of them later. We have biomaterials that you can use as feedstock. You have CCS, might be expensive, but it's still there. And then we have some additional measures that we need to take. New methods within agriculture. Agriculture is one of the trickiest ones to beat, actually. But then to make it net neutral, which you want to do, you can still use carbon sinks and circular economy business models. Hasn't anyone tried to look at how do we do this? The phase 2. Of course, a lot of people have tried to solve this. And we have almost saying a ton of research on this, and I just laid out a few of them here on this page. The Fossilfritt Sverige, the Vägval för klimatet by Royal Academy of Engineering Sciences. We have Klimatpolitiska rådet who releases their reports. We have from Svenskt Näringsliv and Sweco did a calculation of how much bio resources are we claiming. But What these basically do is they look at this, usually at least, they look at one sector and see how do we solve this sector. And there's a problem with that, and I'll come back to this. But before I get to the problem with looking at one sector, I'm going to tell you why we need to look at them all together. And this is the key part of my speech today or presentation today is the need for an integrated climate plan. So what we need to do is first, number 0 actually, we need to update the sector-specific roadmaps based on the latest technical progress. And that's because things are moving fast. Technology is moving really fast. And then I'm talking about things like 10 years ago, you wouldn't think that you could electrify out of the transportation problem. But today, we're pretty sure that we can. We're talking about things like chemical recycling that could solve the plastics problem. And there's a bunch of other things. But then what we also need to do, instead of just updating the roadmaps, we need to look at the holistic picture. And we need to quantify stuff. And that's my number 1 here. And basically what that means is that if you ask a certain sector or a certain company, and I'm out there talking with a lot of these companies, the easy solution, I'm not saying it's that easy, but the easy solution is to say, we'll use biofuels, we'll use bioresources. And a lot of people are saying that. But if you sum them up, I'm not sure we have enough of them. The same thing if you're thinking about, no, but let's then electrify everything. So if we add up the numbers and how much electricity will we need, I'm not sure we have it, and we definitely don't have the capacity in our transmission lines to support that. So you need the complete picture. You need to quantify it across sectors to really say something. The second thing here is a few cross-cutting themes where you're not just summing it up and looking at adding the sectors together, but you're looking at how can they actually help each other. And the infrastructure, something that goes across sectors. Circular economy and sustainable consumption, for sure. And then thirdly, we need a transition plan for policy, and also a very clear view on what does policy need to accomplish. For instance, when you go into a new type of technology, I'm sure a lot of you have read about the steel industry. Can you produce it with hydrogen instead of the old Swedish classic production method? That might be a bit more expensive, but so what can policy do to actually make it cost competitive so that companies can transfer over there? And there's all other things that policy need to think about. I listed just a few of them here. But let me give you the one example that I talked about earlier before I hand over, and that's about transportation and biofuels. How much biofuel do we need in road transport 2030 in Sweden? It's not an easy question, and if you look at a few of the premier reports that has been released in Sweden, it's obviously not an easy question. Because the estimations is from 40 terawatt-hour down to 10. If you look at just a few, you see the sources here. And nothing against the reports, but it's a tricky question. Hence, the need to understand what else should we use bioresources for? Can we put everything into transportation? I talked about electrification. That's for sure an option for cars, but maybe not for trucks. Or is it? It could actually be cost comparative by 2027 to internal combustion engines. We're not there yet, we don't know, but we could get there. And if you then start to think about the transportation sector, should we then use electricity or should we use biofuel or should we use both? It helps to add up the picture, and this is just, I won't go into all the details because it's a bit of a heavy picture, but here we just did a very first estimation. You need to do this even more properly, but when we add up the numbers on the claims and the demand and the supply in Swedish forest, it doesn't really add up. So what we have on the right-hand side is the potential future supply. The light gray is what we're producing sustainably and using today, or harvesting sustainably and using today. And here we even added up the potential future supply by additional use of bioproducts. If a hotter climate makes forests grow faster, we added all those things up, and some of them are quite controversial, like intensifying forestry at the cost of biodiversity, perhaps. And then you look at the left-hand side, we're just adding up what we have today, growth in pulp production, and also use in transportation and industry, and et cetera, et cetera. So the equation doesn't add up. So someone needs to look at this with a holistic picture. And that's why we need the integrated climate plan that we're thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Pelle. A concrete plan telling us how we shall reach the goals, and an integrated plan that will give the complete picture and how they fit together, how they go together, coordinated. And when we have that plan, problems won't be solved. We need to communicate it, and we need to have a pedagogical presentation and to reach out to politicians and to citizens in general, the whole society. And that is where Climate View comes into the picture. This is what Peder told us about was the content of the plan, the parts of it at least, and the analysis that need to be done. And what Tomer Shalit, who is the CEO of Climate View and the inventor of this software instrument called Panorama and used by the Climate Council, Klimatpolitiska rådet, Climate Policy Council, also to present the situation up to today. We will use it to add on the future, to have a future picture and using Panorama as the basis. So please, Tomer, the inventor of this instrument and the CEO.
Thank you. We believe this can be solved. But as Staffan was saying, this has to be solved together. Top-down, government, bottom-up, citizens, companies. We have to solve this together. And if you want to solve something together, you need a common language. You need a way to share the picture, understand where you are. And we also need a way to subdivide this enormous complexity into small, handleable parts, so that we can actually start tackling it and actually see that some things are going in the right direction and speed those things up. So as a starting point for the Super Climate Plan, we have actually got a very, very powerful building block from the Swedish government with the Swedish Energy Agency, the Climate Policy Council, and the Environmental Protection Agency, who has built Panorama, which is a way to overview and see Sweden's entire climate policy and see where we're at, how we're doing, where the gaps are, and what's actually been done. So Panorama gives us a joint picture. Now, this is complete open data. This is on the web. You can go and check it out today at the Climate Policy Council. And it's an open website where anyone can go. And I'll dive into it. So basically here, we're summarizing Sweden's climate policy, our territorial emissions, the ones that we have to get down for the Paris Agreement. So you see the top half there, we have Sweden's greenhouse gas emissions, 53 million tons. We have the potentials of how we solve those emissions, how we reduce them. We have indicators and trends showing how things actually are doing. And then we have all the policies and actions done by government to try and make this happen. So I'll dive in. So you see the width here. We have the different emissions. As we were talking about before, we have the transport, we have the industry, we have agriculture, we have energy. The width here representing Sweden's emissions, as we are reporting to the IPCC. A total of 53 million tons today. We'll know the years for this year in a few weeks. So let's dive down into one of the areas, transport. So there we see Sweden's transport is spread by passenger transport, the largest width, and then we have goods transport, and we have other stuff. I'll tell you already here, a lot of people that's actually sort of should know, get surprised at how large a part of Sweden's emissions are actually passenger transports, which is surprising that people don't know, but also it's quite positive because we've just heard that's actually a solvable problem. At least a lot of the solution is there. So how are we going to solve it? Well, let's dive down. And here we start seeing the solutions. And the width here, again, describing where the impact of the solutions are. We have reduced energy usage, and we have renewable fuels. So as you see, a large part of this is actually by reducing the energy uses for passenger transport. So what do we mean by that? Well, it's what we call a transport-efficient society. How do we change society so we use less energy? Well, reduced transport by car is by far the biggest part. So making people shift from driving cars to other transportation modes. So how does that happen? Well, largest part there is increased proportion on public transport. We all know this, and you see here that actually, if you look at increased proportion of public transport, there's a potential there. 3% of Sweden's emissions is us actually going, just us in cities who have access to public transport, using more public transport. So let's go in and see about how that could look. So if we go from about 10% today of work transportation by public transport to going something like 19% by 2030, that's basically following that turquoise line there. We reduce 3% of Sweden's emissions. Downside here, the black line there is going, that's the actual outcome. That's how things are going just now. We're actually heading in the wrong direction. We have been heading in the right direction, we're suddenly dipping. But we see there where the gap is just now. It's not a projection in the future. The gap just now is 18% off target. So what's happening to do something about this? Well, here we see the Swedish law. We have approved laws, we have completed but not yet implemented, and then bottom there we have suggestions. And here's the most important part. Here it's open for suggestions. And what the Swedish Climate Policy Council is doing with Panorama is opening up this platform, which is open data, for parties like Global Utmaning to start coming with suggestions on what we can do about this, so that we together are sharing the same picture where the gaps are, and together can come with suggestions, detail them, and explain them. So that way, we have a joint picture of Sweden's entire transition, shared by everyone, clearly communicated, that all parties of society can start agreeing upon and start seeing things such as, hang on, everyone is using biofuel. That's a problem. You can see that here. And it's all open data and therefore open for society, so we can work top down, bottom up together.
Thank you. And Tomer, those yellow dots that you have there, that's public suggestions, that's public proposals, public committees.
Yes, so yes. The yellow ones are the ones currently by government. And what's happening now with the platform, it will open up. So there will be blue dots, which are from civil society, from movements, which can come with their own suggestions.
So when we have worked for some time, we will start adding blue dots to this picture.
Yes.
And show how we gradually will shrink these gaps until they become zero.
Yes.
So we will project the development and also the effects of policy decisions that we take and changes that we assess.
Exactly, and we'll also be able to see the gaps, and the gaps just now, they don't have to be arguments, they are facts. The gaps are not gaps of projections of the future of where we might be, which is obviously a subjective argument, but the gaps we're showing just now are the gaps of where we are just now off track, so that we have a fact base to stand upon, so that when we come with arguments, and we'll have different opinions on how to solve the gaps, we don't have to argue about the facts. They are there.
And good. And now we are establishing this project. We are organizing it, and we are recruiting the finance for it. Because as you can well understand, this is not for free. To have very qualified people to work together, Global Utmaning, Material Economics, and Climate View in one organization, and to show how Sweden should go ahead to reach the climate goals. We are far from doing it now, and we will show how it could be done, and we'll do what we can to convince politicians and all others to accept and implement our recommendations. And we have among our potential and likely, I should say, partners in this work. We have the Swedish trade union movement, and we have a number of companies who are interested to support this, this work. And are you this one? Okay. So that was Panorama Sweden, and that was us. And so what we are going to do, first of all, the need is to have this integrated and ambitious plan for climate action. And having that, we will be the drivers on the Swedish climate goals and reach carbon neutrality by 2045. And it will be anchored in the business community. We will have constant consultations with the relevant companies, the most relevant companies. I learned today that SSAB, with their hybrid project, they thought that they would reach carbon neutrality in their project in 2045, but now they say it could be reached already 2027. So technology is moving ahead very, very quickly, which will which make our task, the task of the world, much, much easier. So by this work that we are going to do, I just started to do, is we will accelerate Sweden's transformation, and we will facilitate with the communication work together with the trade unions, get a broad support and understanding of the necessity of change. And we will add to it also if this is green, we need also red color in this change, because we have to look at the distributional effects. We have to have the social effects, and we have to meet the effects of people, for people living in very remote areas where there are no alternatives in communication, for instance. So there has to be that content also in our plan. And when we talk about deliveries, cooperation is, of course, that part of the communication work. And we will work with scenarios, various scenarios, to present various roads to reach the targets. And by doing this, and doing this in this broad communication strategy, we will hope that we will also contribute to a political consensus about the road forward to reach the target, the climate goals. So this is us doing the work, and our strength is our combination of different skills and our broad networks. And when we feel ready for it, we will also reach out to the outside world. We'll translate what we're doing, because much of what Sweden could do could be done and is needed to be done also in other countries. Because it's not enough with Sweden transforming. We all have to do it. And some countries have bigger difficulties in achieving transformation than Sweden has. So we have a responsibility for the outside world. And these are the stages. We are in stage 1 right now, the financing and the organizing stage. We will start by collecting existing data and evaluate existing data. And we will continue to stage 3 and develop the policy action needed, and start the communication work. We formulate a super climate plan, and we have a dialogue with policy makers. We will probably have a dialogue with each party at a time to start with. And we will then, of course, as the last stage, stage 4, launch the super climate plan, and we'll present it at COP. Maybe the first version will be already in COP26, and then in COP27 it will be the final version, or final. Maybe nothing is ever final in this world. It will be something that we will continue to work on, but then more in a more administrative way, adding up new facts. So that is the work that we, in very, very short terms, that we are planning. And now I would like to have the final comment from our youth representative in Madrid, Ludwig Bengtsson-Sonesson. Hi again. Now you have listened to what we are planning. It is in very summarized everything. But do you feel a little bit more secure that there might be a change coming from this Madrid meeting, and that maybe we could add to it in our work?
Well, I mean, thank you for this presentation. It was fascinating to see all the ideas you had. I had several points I wanted to comment on, but right here at the end, you swooped them up and made sure to include civil society and other parties in the discussion. Because, I mean, I haven't given up on multilateralism as much as Ingmar seems to have yet, because the thing with these processes is that people get to have an input, whether you're a small island state or if you're a developing nation, developed nation. And I think you really need to take that into consideration when drafting this, so you know the effects these changes will have on people. And then the second point, Amitav Ghosh, the author, has said that we're in a crisis of imagination when it comes to climate change. And I really think that's true. We have trouble imagining what all these changes will do to our daily lives and our experiences of living on this planet. And that also connects to what Staffan was saying, that we need to have this cultural shift. And I really think you need to look at that as well. How can you use different methods of storytelling to convey what the life will be like under this society that you propose in the Super Climate Plan? And try to be creative with it. Create something that people can actually relate to and that make them feel emotion. Because I find it really fascinating to listen to material economics presentation about these different technologies and all that, but maybe that doesn't appeal to everyone. Maybe you need something else to appeal to them, because we all need to get behind this for it to actually have legitimacy when it's implemented. But thank you for this opportunity to comment on and hear what you're doing. I look forward to at next COP then, see the climate plan, right?
Yes. Thank you, Ludwig, for your comments. And we look forward to working with the youth of Sweden in this climate plan. And I'm sure that we could do a lot together when it comes to formulating the narratives that we need to feel confident about the future. Because what is the worst for people, and that is the danger for democracy, is when people don't have faith in the future. We must create faith in the future, and that is something we could do together.
Yeah, that we agree on.
Some of us very old, some very young. Okay? Thank you so much, Ludwig. And to all of you, time is out. I see Mary is looking at me. Okay, so we have time for that. Great. I thought you would cut down everything at... all right. So, questions. We are happy to have some back there. Please give your name and then your question. Yes, you there. Exactly.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jonas. I'm from Regeneration 2030, and I'm also something of a youth representative, I guess. And I want to know, after these magnificent presentations and useful ideas we are being shown, and seeing this super climate plan where you mention all the experts and all the funding and the fields, I see no room for youth in that plan, except for the mentioning of Ludwig in the end, and then saying, well, let's work together in the future. And I'm wondering, how can I get in on that now? Where's the room for me? I'm sure there's room somewhere. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Join us. We're very open for more partners.
Everybody,
so
everyone
yes,
is open.
We're Euro just talked to us. We're really interested in that.
We will formulate a number of reference groups. We have experts, and some will be old, some will be young, but then we will have other groups as well, and we have a lot of activities that we hope to carry out together with trade unions in education and discussion, dialogue with people, and I expect that many of the people wanting to take part will be young. I hope. Okay, somebody up there? Yes, please.
Hi, so I'm Ebba Engström and I work at Vinnova and also studying a bit here now. But my question, because I've seen this panorama presentation before at my work, and I understand that at the moment this is only covering emissions within Sweden and not outside. And I understand that at the moment countries only measure within their countries, whether it's Sweden or it's Bangladesh or so forth. But I'm wondering if we talk of actual responsibility and Sweden having all of these resources, shouldn't we actually then be phasing in the part of measuring our external emissions? I don't see how we can talk about actual responsibility when we're not doing this yet.
Yeah. Staffan, would you like to comment on that? Or Tomer?
Am I on? You are correct. That should be done. And I think it...
But we have the...
First of all, you can always integrate that in the panorama plan as far as I have understood it. That's first thing. Second, it necessitates a lot of statistical work because it is a tricky work to identify these kind of things with some precision. But I agree it should be done, and I believe it can be done.
And could it be done by panorama?
Yeah, now we're actually totally agree, and on the national level, well, that's because it's the Paris agreements. But if we look at cities and doing the same thing, obviously consumption data is really important. And as you say, it's not statistically it's harder, but that doesn't really matter. It's like we want to see the big proportions and where we can do stuff. So yes, we should do consumption, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I'd like just to hear whether Madrid might have a question. No?
I'm not quite sure. I'm to those of you in Stockholm. I'm Andre Amholt. I'm on stage with Ludwig here to facilitate the audience here in Madrid. Are there any questions from the audience in Madrid? No. I, though, actually have a question because the young girl who was talking or asking questions earlier on, she wanted to go international or measure every country together. I was kind of curious to Panorama if it's also possible to go the other way, because we do know that it all comes down to us as individuals to kind of measure or make us a tool so that we could each measure our own impression, if you like, to go the other way around. I don't know if you have ever thought of it, but I'm asking the question.
Well, I think there are a couple of very good tools for measuring your own emissions. I think it would be very interesting to sort of see it in the same context as national, so you sort of feel like how am my small stuff part of the big picture? So I think it would be there are lots of really good tools, but it would be interesting to connect them to sort of the same perspective, same kind of view. So yeah, that would be good. We could do that.
Sure, it could be.
I hope so.
So we take one more.
Okay, good.
Okay, my name is Staffan Eriksson. I think this is a great show and certainly very informative, but I just like to throw out, isn't it more efficient in the short scale to really work internationally through the UN for a global carbon dioxide tax for everyone to get a cap and get a value on?
Well,
I can.
Staffan?
The first question is, they are not against each other. You should go both ways. That is the primary thing. Secondly, we have had 30 years of international negotiations. We have had 70 global climate meetings, and we have reached nothing more or less. So that means we can't trust on just waiting for the top-down solution for another 30 years, then we are too late. So my personal advice is, go for the international negotiations on the one hand, but start the bottom-up strategies at the same time. And that will, at best, that will also put force and incentives to make the global negotiations much more efficient.
The voice...
But she is a bottom-up thing, isn't she?
Greta is fantastic and is a great support for what we are trying to achieve, but she is not the person that pretends to have any solutions. We must focus on solutions now. We have the responsibility to do that. And I would like to say that if Sweden can present solutions, our voice in the international community and discussions will be so much stronger. We need to do both, absolutely. I totally agree. Global climate tax is what we will need to have.
Could you just add something? I totally agree with Staffan and you that we need to do both, and we're doing this. But just to add something in the discussion about the global carbon taxes, I don't know, I don't like taxes. Many people don't like taxes. That's a communication problem. I think we should turn that communication around and talk about stop fossil fuel subsidies. Because today, the world gives fossil fuel industry $5.2 trillion in subsidies. I would like to turn around the discussion, not about taxes, but about taking away the subsidies. It's the same thing, but it's much more efficient in communicating, I think.
Yes, stop the excavation of fossil. Right. So are we then, it's time to thank you, the audience. You have been a perfect audience. And Tove would like to say something? Or you remind them. Yes. I won't forget. There are some refreshments waiting for you before you leave, and then we can have some, continue the discussion, but on a more bilateral or trilateral manner. So thank you so much for listening and for coming here tonight, and we look forward to meeting again. Thank you so much.